All right, guys, let's do some more rotation practice. So if I am going to rotate 90 degrees around the origin, that is implied that we are going counterclockwise. So our rule for going 90 degrees counterclockwise is we swap and change the first one. So I swap and change the sign on the first one. Now the thing is, we don't have to use a whole shape to do it. We might just use ordered pairs, or like if I connect these two, I'm moving a little line. That can also happen. So if I do this to A prime, or to A rather, I swap and change the sign of the first one. Same thing for B prime, I would swap and then change the sign of the first one. Okay, so if we think about doing this graphically, A is at 3, 2. B is at -4, 1. Because I'm going 90 degrees counterclockwise, I'm going to move one quadrant. So like because A is here, it should end up over here. And because B is in this quadrant, it should end up over here. So like they're each moving one quadrant counterclockwise. So again, I can't stand a non-straight line, so I'm going to get a straight line here. When I go plot this point now, and again, it's just easier to use our little trick rather than having to think about how to do it graphically. A prime is at -2, 3. So that guy did move one quadrant. And then B prime is at -1, -4. So he also moved one quadrant. And you can see too how the points swapped where they're at, like it was over 4, then up 1, and now it's over 1, down 4. So that's another way to think about it as well. Oh, and when the lines do cross, they should make a 90. So you can see that there too. So that's cool. All right, let's stay on that topic just so we get it really stuck in our brain. So if we open this up, if we're going 90 degrees counterclockwise, we're going to swap and change the sign of the first one. Swap, change the sign of the first one. So A is at 1, 5. So I'm going to swap and change the sign of the first one. B is at 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So B prime, I'm going to swap and change the sign of the first one. And then C is at 2, 1. So C prime, I'm going to swap and change the sign of the first one. So if I go to graph this now, sorry, I'm trying to stay with similar colors. A prime would be at -5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. So moved one quadrant over. B prime is at -1, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And C is at -1, 2. So this one, like feeling good about how your shape rotated is a little bit trickier, I feel like, because you almost have to imagine picking this up and turning it, which is a kind of tricky thing to do. So, but they did all move over one quadrant, which I feel really good about. And then again, another way that I showed you to kind of feel good about what you've done is you could connect each image to its pre-image point, or rather to the origin to see if it's 90, but I can also just do it on one, or maybe the one that I feel the most sus about. Anyways, like when I do connect them, it should make a 90-degree angle, and it does. And if you did it for B, it would, and if you did it for A, it would. So that's another way to feel good about what you've done. Alrighty, taking a look at a quadrilateral. D is at the point 1, 2, 3, -3, 3. So if I'm still going 90 degrees counterclockwise, I'm going to swap and change the sign on the first one. E is at 0, 3. So when I get its image, I'm going to swap and change the sign of the first one. F is at 1, -1. So I'm going to swap and change the sign of the first one. And that's literally how I do it. Like I write it down and then I put a line down. And if that makes it positive, good. And if it makes it negative, good. Whatever it's supposed to do. And then G is at 1, 2, 3, 4, -4, -1. And so G prime, I'm going to swap and change the sign on the first one. Then I go graph them. So D prime will be at -3, -3, 1, 2, 3. E will be at -3, 0, which that one I feel real good about. Like it was on this axis and now it's one axis over. So again, 90 degrees. So that feels good and makes sense. F is going to be at 1, 1. So that moved one quadrant over. And then G prime is at 1, -4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the trapezoid that I started with should be the same trapezoid that I end up with, just turned. So hopefully that is what happened. And that to me feels real believable. I feel really good about it because this was a trapezoid that was pointing up. And now it's kind of, so like pointing up to me, I guess. And now it's pointing to the left. So that shows me that I moved one quadrant counterclockwise. So hopefully that feels good and makes sense. I know rotations can be real tricky. Honestly, guys, I do. Like, I remember doing them in high school thinking, like, I do not see what you're saying. Like, I don't understand how a rotation is a rotation. And the only reason I'm good at it now is because I've done it so much. So really, practice makes perfect, as always. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it. If you're lucky enough to see it and you're like, girl, this is easy, good for you. Because, like, that spatial awareness is a really good skill to have. Alrighty, so a rotation of 180 degrees. We have a little tricky for that too. When I do a rotation of 180, clockwise or counterclockwise, doesn't matter. I just change both signs. So it will now be -x, -y. Or positive and positive. If they both started negative, you just change the signs. So if A was at 3, 2, now it would be at -3, -2. And if B was at -4, 1, it would now be at +4, -1. So I just switch both the signs or change both the signs. Okay, so if we plot this, A was at 3, 2. B is at -4, 1. And so we get this really straight line right here. Now, if we think about rotating this 2 quadrants, because 180 is 2 90s, A will go 1, 2, so it should end up down in this quadrant somewhere, so that we want to feel good about that. So -3, -2, and it does. B prime has got to also move 2 quadrants, so it should end up over here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, -1, and it does. And the super fun thing about rotating 180 is it's kind of the same as reflecting over the x-axis and over the y-axis. Like if you remember, reflecting over x, you change y, and reflecting over y, you change x. And so if I do both, then I change both, which is exactly what 180 does. So it kind of gets flipped and then flipped again. So like I can totally see that, like these flipped and then flipped. So that's another fun way to think about rotating 180 degrees. Alrighty, so staying with that one here, same triangle. So A was at 1, 5. Rotating 180 means I'm just going to change the sign, B was at 4, 1. So B prime will be at -4, -1. And C was at 2, 1. So C prime will be at -2, -1. Okay, so then I go plot them, and it should be 2 quadrants over, so it should be down here. And I feel good about that because all these numbers are negative, and this is where all the numbers are negative. So we got -1, -5 for A. And that feels good to me too because like it started at the top and now it's at the bottom. So I like that. B prime is at -4, -1. And then C prime is at -2, -1, which they have that line of 2. So everything stayed equal measure, which is super good as well. Oops, I think I forgot to highlight my images on the front. Gonna have to do that. And again, guys, I can think about this as 2 reflections. So like it got reflected over here and then reflected down, so flipped twice. Just kind of fun fact, we love that. All right, now trying it with a 4-sided figure. So same trapezoid as before. And if I think about rotating this 180 degrees, like it's gonna go 2 quadrants. So it's gonna mostly be down here. But also like everything should sort of like flip over. So instead of pointing to the left, it's now gonna be pointing down, like the shorter edge is gonna be on the bottom. So that's another thing to look out for. So D was at -3, 3. And when I do a rotation of 180, I change both the signs. So positive and now negative. E was at 0, 3. And so I'm going to change both the signs, but I can't change the sign of 0. So it's kind of going to look like I'm only changing one of the signs. F was at 1, -1. So F prime is going to be at -1, 1. Which that's also kind of sneaky because it feels like I flipped the numbers, but I didn't, I swear. And then G is at -4, -1. And so G prime, I'm going to swap the signs. So positive, positive now. And then we'll go graph that, guys. So D prime is at 3, -3. Which I feel good about that. It moved 2 quadrants. Now I'm just hoping that when I plot E, like it's making a straight line with D on the bottom. So E prime is at 0, -3. Oh my goodness, yay. So we get that flat line at the bottom now rather than the top. And then F prime is going to be at -1, 1. And again, I feel good about that. It moved 1, 2 quadrants. And then G prime is at 4, 1. So again, getting you that flat line right there, the longer one now at the top. Let me reconnect to get our trapezoid back. And there we go. All right, I got to get these images highlighted on the front. I can't believe I forgot about that. Alrighty, and last but not least, a rotation of 270 degrees counterclockwise around the origin is going to be a similar one to 90, so I swap, but now I change the sign of the second. So, and that's maybe another way to think about it too. With the 90 and 270, both of them swap, but 90 comes first, so you change the first sign, and 270 comes second, so you change the second sign. Maybe that's a good way to remember it. I know it's a lot. And so again, if I have the point 3, 2, A prime, I'm going to swap and change the sign of the second. B prime, I'm going to swap and change the sign of the second. So now if I go to graph this, A is at 3, 2, and B is at -4, 1 here, same as before. And so if I think about how it's going to rotate, A's got to move 3 quadrants now, so 1, 2, 3, so it should end up over here. And B also needs to move 3 quadrants, so 1, 2, 3, it should end up here. So if I plot that, hopefully it looks good and makes sense. So A prime is at 2, -3. Hooray. And B prime is at 1, +4. And again, when they cross each other, they make a 90 or a 270, depending on which way you're going, because like a full circle is 360, so 90 one way is the same as 270 the other, because they add up to 360. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Alrighty, if we go on the inside and try it again with our same old triangle and trapezoid, A was at 1, 5. So because I'm going 270, I'm going to swap and change the second one. B was at 4, 1. So when I get B prime, I'm going to swap and change the sign of the second. And C was at 2, 1. So I'm going to swap and change the sign of the second. Then I'm going to go graph it. And so before I do, maybe I'm going to think about it a little bit. It's going to go 270, so 3 quadrants. So it should end up down here. Also, like this is kind of pointing up, then pointing left, then pointing down, then pointing right. So it should kind of be pointing right when I end with my shape. So A prime is at 5, -1. Already feel really good about this. B is at 1, -4, or B prime rather, and then C is at 1, -2. And we get that flat line that I should always have between C and B of 2, so that's good. And we're pointing right, which is so nice. And we're 3 quadrants over, which also feels good and makes sense. Cool. Last but not least, if we take a trapezoid and rotate it 270 degrees, it should end up in here. And it might overlap a little bit, but that's okay. Like that overlapped over here, and that's okay. It can happen. Also, if we think about how the flat line here is going to rotate, like right now it's up and then it's going to be left and then down, and now it's going to be to the right again. So that's kind of a nice way to think about things. Alrighty, so D was at -3, 3. When I rotate 270 counterclockwise, I swap and then change a second. E is at 0, 3, so E prime, we're going to swap. And I can't really change the sign of the second because it's 0. F is at 1, -1. F prime, I'm going to swap and change the sign on the second. And then G is at -4, -1. We're going to swap and change the sign of the second. Okay, so when we go plot this now, D is going to be at 3, 3. Yay, that's 1, 2, 3 quadrants. It's always like a surprise for me too, honestly. I know you're like, girl, you should know. You should not be nervous, but I'm always a little nervous. Like, is it going to do what I want it to do? E is at 3, 0. So that feels super good to me too because it's this flat line still between D and E. So that's good. F prime is at -1, -1. So that feels kind of strange to me, but it did go 1, 2, 3 quadrants, or back 1 quadrant if you like to think of it that way too. And then G prime is at -1, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we got that flat line between G and F again, which is good. And then finish connecting your trapezoid. And it's pointing to the right, like we kind of thought about it beforehand. And oh my gosh, I love rotations. All right, I'll see you on the next one.